we are just amazed by the research that has been done by the CAC teams, and this is certainly no exception to that. So we appreciate you all being here tonight. Okay.
All right, my name is Dave Manager, and my team here is the social media and its impact on students and families team. For this year, we're made up of Julie Kritzner, Allison Dupuy, Chad Harness, Ian Klingler, Mariana Nickel, and Kathy Ramsetter. One of those folks I wanted to point out, I have to click those things. One of our team members unfortunately passed away this year, but we wanted to acknowledge her contributions and point out that she was a great team member to have, eager to dig into this topic, and so we didn't want that to be overlooked. We only knew her a little bit, but we already miss her. So the study, what did we do? We were tasked to examine the impact of social media on students and families. We were assigned 2 pieces of media to study in particular. That is the book, The Anxious Generation, and the mini-series / documentary, The Social Dilemma, that was put out by Netflix a few years ago. The other specific tasks that we had were to explore how social media and device use impacts families, and provide some recommendations, as most CNC groups usually would do. As I mentioned, we did study the film, took a lot of notes, read the book, took a lot of notes. We also did a survey of parents in the district, and got 283 responses, which we were happy with. And we also surveyed around to different districts and asked them, what are your policies and how did they go, to the extent that other districts were able to say. So first up, I'll give you a quick rundown of the social dilemma. The basic gist of it is that there are a lot of tech companies today that have built apps and websites and businesses around affecting people's behavior, and in particular in ways that the user may not be aware of or may not want. The thing about the way these businesses work is that the more engagement they can drive, the more money they'll make. And so to a certain extent, they will in fact study behavior modification and psychology and all these things to keep you on the app as much as possible. There we go. We have a couple quotes here, but it's sort of been well studied, in particular that overuse of these apps contributes to negative mental health outcomes, and including disinformation, extremism, negative mental health outcomes, addiction, depression, and anxiety. And studies also show that these are more pronounced in younger users, which is relevant to our interests. That's a quick rundown of the social dilemma. Unfortunately, the movie does not end with a optimistic ending. Because of these business models, this will probably continue without some form of regulation. So it's something to be aware of. The next topic we're going to go into is the anxious generation, and I'm going to introduce it with this slide that will give you some things to think about as we go through all the details. Jonathan Haidt wrote this book, and it's extremely popular this year. He does form a very compelling story of how he believes society has changed in the last decade. There are many correlations that he has discovered and highlights in his book. The science isn't quite so clear on which of these things are causing the others. It's really kind of the answer is still out. And there are some researchers who are concerned that deciding that we figured it out and we're done is more dangerous than continuing to study this. So in any case, we will now talk about the book itself, and Kathy's going to give you that. Well, if you want to see the notes, it's on Chad's. That's for that.
Okay, got it. So I'm going to start a little bit with just in general, what we know about smartphones and mental health. This is the data from, the book. He has this slide about the increase in major depression, and particularly since the introduction of the smartphone, which is different than the introduction of a cell phone, because of the way that it was behind the scenes of what the social dilemma mentions with the apps and the way they're intended to create addiction and continued use. And it is equally affecting our boys and girls, but in different ways, which we'll get into when we talk just a little bit. But basically, girls are affected more from the social perspective, with feeling lonely and ostracized, whereas boys are getting into things with gaming and pornography, neither of which are very helpful. I mean, there are parts of gaming which can be quite helpful, but when you're spending all your time there, not spending time in real life. And then I've been recently writing a lot about the neuroscience of learning. I interviewed one of my pediatrician friends, and as he talks about what we know more today than we did 10 years ago about how learning occurs, and when a new idea is introduced into our brain, if we flood it with interference, this is not talking about the addiction of social media, but we flood it with the interference of social media and cell phone and constant distraction, we're interfering with our brain's ability to lay down memory so that later in sleep it can be consolidated, so that later on test day, we can actually remember the information and apply it. And if we don't do that initial step of having some rest and letting the brain do what it needs to do to initially consolidate, we're not going to be able to build on that. And it just is not going to get consistent memory. It's just running interference, and which is which some of the data on smartphone usage is showing that it is running interference for learning, specifically for learning and memory consolidation. According to Haidt, so the next several slides are going to be what Haidt is sharing with us. And one of the things that was sort of contra Haidt was that he's not the psychologist. He's not the one running the study. But what he is, he's a great storyteller, and he has done the literature review, saving all of us the trouble to do it, which I'm very happy when somebody does that, because I don't like to do all that either, but I've had to do it myself, so I'm going to catch me up here. And so he contrasts, and there's some. This book came out in March of 24, and it has really hit the ground running. I mean, he really has got a lot of traction, got a lot of people interested. And prior to it coming out here in the States, countries in Europe, prior to this book coming out, had already done nationwide cell phone bans in their countries. So this is not a new conversation in Europe. This is a new conversation to our country. In fact, Florida was one of the first states, was the first state in the United States to do a statewide ban in schools of cell phones in 2023. Just FYI there for you. I'm not sure how it's playing out or how that goes, but it was banned in 2023. It may have gotten on the chopping block later, but and I'm not sure what it looks like, but they did ban it in the States. So the point is for Haidt is if he's looking at real world versus virtual world experiences, you might have heard it in real life versus the social world, but the hazards of one over the other. And to Dave's point to begin with, perhaps it's not an either or, perhaps it's a way of learning how to manage and be in both places in the time that is appropriate. But he also gets down to when we had this increase of social media and phone usage, we had this decrease of in-person play time, exploration, outside time. And as a result, we can see correlated simultaneous to the increase in smartphones, these 4 foundational harms also spiking in our country and our young people. Social deprivation, which is basically, this is so fascinating to me. When cell phones were first introduced, I remember somebody saying, but this is a way for all of our young people that don't feel comfortable to have a voice. They can do polling in the classroom we were teaching at UC, and that was a cool thing. Now the kids that don't want to raise their hands can raise their hands. But did we take away the connection with other humans? COVID would probably show us a little bit, it did. But this is really telling this correlation of the number and percentage of students, boys and girls, who often feel lonely with the introduction of smartphones in 2009 and 10. In terms of sleep deprivation, we can all know that when you don't get a good sleep, you can't sleep, but you can't think quite well. And also that affects back to how it affects your learning. If you don't sleep well, you don't consolidate your memories for long-term storage, you can't retain them for use and to be scaffolded later. Attention fragmentation is a term that Haidt uses. He actually kind of borrows it from an earlier book by, what was that guy's name? Hold on. Nicholas Carr in The Shallows. And this is how he described that we do make an intentional decision to be paying attention on task. But when you've got all these things dinging you and buzzing you, and even when you put your phone on silent, it might still buzz you. And the idea that it might happen, all of your thoughts become dazed and kind of fragmented. And this is what a teenager brain looks like. And I just did a presentation to a bunch of people, and I'm like, really, if you look at it, it's like prefrontal cortex is like way squished more than that, where all of our rational thinking is occurring because it's not formed. And the amygdala and the limbic system, which are in the middle where the hippopotamus is there, that's like on fire in teenagers already. And then we add a lot of other stuff coming into us. I mean, a lot of distraction, and it's like running around in circles. That poor little hippo is just dancing away. So some other things, just how these are some other studies that show what attention fragmentation, if you break it down, it's exactly what it is. It's your thoughts are going all over the place, which makes it difficult to focus and interferes with encoding new memories. And this was similar to what Dave was talking to with about the social dilemma. The internal reports, that's really scary about that documentary, you know, you got people on the inside confessing, like, not that they're confessing, but they are confessing, like, we knew this was gonna happen. You know, it's like Pavlov's dog. We know if we put cheese over here and we ring the bell and there's no cheese, it's still gonna come because it might be there, right? It's the same kind of thing. So they really kind of did it on purpose, which is sad. And then this is something that I think as educators and parents, the scary part for our youngest, our most vulnerable students, for whatever reason, these issues are impacting their ability to learn more adversely than our kids who are already more well adjusted. So you throw in a few ACEs, 1, 2, 3, kids in trauma, throw in a smartphone, and that's going to more adversely affect those kids with multiple ACEs and living in daily trauma than the kids who are coming from a more well-adjusted, less adverse experiences in their lives. And it's also likely going to interfere with executive function across the board. And then the last foundational harm is addiction. Just that I got a little meme yesterday, totally sidebar, but this was really funny to me. Somebody sent me a TikTok. I don't do this, but it was a bunch of old people at a slot machine, like doing this, because it was like Happy Easter. So every time somebody said Happy Easter, they were like liking it, like all day long. So like we're addicted to it. Your likes, you get your thumbs up, you get your thumbs up, and then you got a thumbs down, like travesty. So we're addicted to it. I mean, and not just our kids. So this is for me the play recess advocate. This is so sad. We ended up overprotecting our children in the real world while we underprotect them in the virtual world. And I'm going to turn it over to my colleague here, Chad, who's going to talk to you about our survey. There you go.
Yeah, so we sent a survey out to parents and 286.
283.
Responded. Of that, roughly a third were multifamily, and I blew that data out, so you'll see numbers that exceed that at times, but that's because I actually did a little trick, we're adding some observations to account for the fact that parents were answering it from multiple schools. So these are the 4 things that they said that they were the most concerned about from a negative perspective, right? And they do in fact align with what we've seen before. I don't know if that's an influence of the book or not, but certainly was the highest response items for concern. Whoa, that was not good. There we go. Is it the right button?
That's the right we all pay.
Yeah.
So, most parents are concerned about phone usage, and want community support to manage that. What we aren't showing here, that's kind of what that says in a nutshell. What we aren't showing here, but it's also good to note that they also saw the main benefits of this is having a phone for communication, the parents and family, social connections, and safety and emergency contacts. We saw this quite frequently as well. The major concerns have to do with these negative aspects that we talked about. I'm going to dig into which ones kind of rose to the top in here in just a minute. The first was characterize how our parents orient themselves towards cell phone and social media usage. The key takeaway here is that across all the schools, right, at least 3/4 of families have a policy on either social media usage or cell phone usage. In other words, parents tend to approach cell phones and social media seriously and responsibly here in our community. There we go. Sorry. Families that have a policy on cell phones or social media usage tend to be more dissatisfied with school policy. Notably, actual usage of either of these things is insignificant with respect to their opinion on school policy. So in other words, parents voicing concerns are not typically the ones struggling to manage it themselves, and those who have policies, which are most, as we've seen, are less satisfied with the policies that we see in our schools. Okay. So here we see that parents tend to be concerned, parents that tend to be concerned about social media usage and phone usage tend to be more dissatisfied with school policy, and as we've seen, these aren't necessarily the ones who are experiencing the greatest usage in their homes either. Given the positive correlation that you see at the top line there between self-reported comfort.
I am so excited to see p-values on the slide in here. I'm wondering if you could explain the p-value for what that means and how we.
Yeah, so the lower means the more statistically significant it was in the analysis, meaning that it's really hard for me to say that there's no effect. Right? Those are really low p-values. Higher p-values are the opposite. It is a somewhat arbitrary cutoff, but it's. In this case, I'm not using alpha, I'm just using the straight p-value. Yeah. So given the positive correlation between self-reported comfort, managing screen time and social media usage at the top that you see there, this also suggests that concerns tend to be focused on when children are out of parents' direct responsibilities, in other words, at school. So what schools are the parents most concerned about? The primary school and middle school parents tended to be generally satisfied with school policy. So there in the y-axis, you actually see that's the average score that they assign to it right on a Likert scale. As you can see, primary middle school is about the same. The bulk of the parents put it in a satisfied rating on a scale of 1 to 4. High school was significantly lower, statistically significantly lower. So that means we probably need to be focusing on high school policy if we're really going to put our attention somewhere, right? If we're really concerned about parent satisfaction with those policies. What issues should we focus on? So looking at specific concerns, we see 3 items are cited most frequently. But the distributions of policy satisfaction, that by concern, they vary noticeably there. So you'll see, the ones most frequently cited are those ones that we opened with, right? There's some other ones there. And as far as the proportion of folks who are dissatisfied, right, that proportion goes up considerably for some of those. So for example, the, where is it? Inappropriate content there at the very bottom, right? Like, so in other words, a much smaller group of parents are really, really concerned about that. And that really, really drives, or is really, really associated, I should say, with their dissatisfaction with school policy. I did not dig into that particular group. I suspect that they're younger families. So remember the 4 concerns we originally raised? Well, those, plus inappropriate content, they appear to be the issues most strongly associated with dissatisfaction with school policy. Now, note that I grouped these a little bit differently during the formal analysis, but I did a combined sleep and focus here. But these are the same issues we opened the parents say slides with. So to bring home all of this data analysis, if I were to characterize the average parent, described by the data, they would be the parent of a high schooler with a home policy governing cell phone and social media usage, and then with their community's high school policy to align more closely with their home standards, especially regarding concerns about social development issues, like attention, addiction and overuse, sleep, focus, and then a much smaller group citing inappropriate content, that issue is a very strong driver among that group.
Ready. So the other, survey, so to speak, that we did was, asking other districts about their policies. And we've tried to summarize most of what we, come across here on this slide. Most schools restrict cell phone use during class, that's an easy one. A lot of schools have, specific storage areas for phones rather than leaving it up to the student where to put that. Smartwatches, same as a phone, under most policies that we saw. Earbuds and headphones are a kind of interesting one. There are legit uses for those sometimes, in the classroom, but, we saw pretty consistent that, you needed explicit permission to do that. For the most part, there are three main things, I guess. Distraction, like we talked about, these devices, interfere with development. Cheating, which is a whole different area you don't want to have, and privacy and security. So, there may be things that students are doing with the device that we don't want them to be doing in the building. So here's the, oh, come on, this is better than you will. Here's the recommendations for what we're supposed to do about all these problems. According to Height and many other researchers, he wants us to tilt the scale on that distinction between those real world things and those virtual world things. So less phones, but also more playing, more unsupervised time. He's in favor of, for example, like fewer rules at recess and playtimes, for kids to work things out. We saw a few examples that, they'll be linked in the report, but there are some initiatives that, put young kids on a program to engage with the real world around them, like go for a shopping trip by yourself or something, or like ride the bus, or a whole variety of things. And that's actually integrated into the school like a homework assignment, like, and you kind of progress on that. The third bullet is an interesting one. I don't know of anyone doing this, but it sounds like obvious. Don't give a smartphone as a child's first phone. You can call people and text people on a non-smartphone. And you get away from a lot of the apps and games and everything else. And when you do get a smartphone, it really shouldn't be until high school because of the point in time in the development of the neurology in the child's brain. A young child cannot resist the addictions and everything else as well as an older high school age student. And the last one is a lot about, this falls kind of equally on parents and on these platforms, which is that young children should not be able to open accounts and interact with these types of apps and websites until an older age. That's a tricky problem because, of course, you can just say, yes, I am 15 on any sign up form. There are a lot of interesting technical and legal ramifications of age verification, but Height strongly advocates for age verification and raising the age on most things. I don't know if you know, right now, you can't sign up for things online unless you're 13. You can't enter into a contract with a Google, or for example, until you're 13. He recommends at least 16. for the folks in this room, he's got recommendations. In addition to these, he's also got recommendations for local governments and other things if you want to check out the book. But his section on schools specifically recommends, no phone use at school, for all day. Put the phone somewhere where it is, a known location, a controlled location, locker or pouch, but not in the classroom. And like I said, add those good things, more recess time, more unstructured play, shop classes, vocational training. There's a lot of, correlation between the physical activity and development and the social development and the brain's development over time. So here's probably, the slide you were waiting for this whole time. What should we do? Curtail. We bolded that word because we almost said ban all phones. That's a very tough recommendation to make. So we said, let's move towards phone free to the extent that we can. Promote those play-based learning things for students in all grades. That's actually, something that is valuable for kids, K through 12. A recess for a kindergartner is not gonna be the same as what a high school student needs, but they all still need those opportunities. As was apparent in the data, we found that it will be very important to engage the school and community, even more. So, on developing these policies, I think there are a lot of folks that feel pretty strongly. And there are important considerations to, well, if the kid doesn't have a phone, how do you do this or how do you do that? And so there are some ramifications here. We go into more detail in our report on that as well. And then, like Chad mentioned, the high school is probably the good starting point. I think the primary and middle school have kind of already a phone-free rule, and folks are pretty happy with that. And obviously, high school's the tricky one, so that's where the focus should start. And we have this slide here is some specific questions that you might want to take into account that will affect how well these recommendations go down in the community. But yeah, that's everything we wrote.
Could you go back to that one?
Yeah.
One more time?
Yeah. There were a lot of bullets that could have gone on here. We kind of last
Right.
minute threw this on here, but a big one is how are parents to communicate with a child? That was a very common reaction is, well, if my kid doesn't have their phone, how do I text them and tell them that swim practice was canceled or whatever? You don't want to have a situation where the school secretaries are like a messenger running around the building all day. So I don't know what the solution to that problem is. Did you have a specific question?
No, I just wanted to
Yeah.
read the
We
last.
can linger on it for a
Last one
second
there on
here.
the-
Yeah.
Okay.
Thank you for all of this multi-dimensional work, coming at it from so many angles. The data is impressive. So I appreciate the different starting points and dimensions that you came up with. Thank you.
There's a lot to it. One of our unwritten recommendations is that there's still plenty to dig into here. It's not all settled, it's not all figured out. So,